And you're good to go.
Thank you. The Board of Port Wardens will come to order. I'm God of the chair, and we have with us John Butler and Scott Anderson. So we have a quorum. Willie Sampson, Robert Shapiro cannot be here. And we have Tammy Hook, Carrie Berger, Kevin Scott from the city with us. So for the board, you have the agenda before you. Can I have approval of the agenda? Scott, you're muted, but I saw your lips move. Scott,
sorry about that.
Scott's moved approval. All in favor, aye. It has been approved. You have the minutes before you from June the 22nd. I've reviewed them and have no changes. Does anyone have any changes or comments on those minutes? If not, I'd like a motion for them to be approved. Again, Scott has,
Please.
Scott moved. All in favor of approving the minutes, say aye. Aye. It's unanimous. And then we have one findings of fact for the Jabin family estate. I see no changes. We got the letters we needed. So do I have a motion that we approve that? Move. John, approve. I'll approve. Okay. The first item of old business, the 310 3rd Street, has been postponed until August 24th at the request of the applicant, which brings us to the second Chesapeake Bay Associates, which we postponed until today contingent upon receiving no objection letters, and we received two, one from each side of the property, and to have a accurate lateral lines. To address that, we did not get any further lateral lines, but we have a letter from the attorney, Phil Dales, who is here. And I guess if, Phil, I guess, I'm not sure who else, are you the only one that's going to speak on this?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I will speak, and if needed, I know Terry is here and available to speak if there are issues that come up that we need to ask for her input on or for clarification on plans. Okay. Then do you swear to tell the truth to the Port Wardens to the best of your ability upon penalty of perjury? I do, Mr. Chairman.
I do.
Okay. And Terry, I see you. Sorry. So my question really is for John. John, you were the, I think, the one that requested lateral lines. The letter from Mr. Dale said that because lateral lines have previously been approved, that rather than submitted them, he just relabeled the drawing to say that they were lateral lines previously approved. I have some views, but John, do you want to comment on that?
Sure. Question for Mr. Dale. Is it your opinion that the previously approved, the diagram shows previously approved lateral lines? Is your opinion that those comply with the lateral line construction described in Title 15?
Mr. Butler, I will try to sidestep that question by suggesting to you that my argument in the letter is that it's not necessary in the case of every application to require updated lateral lines, and where the updated lines would be very problematic for us as an applicant and property owner, and for other properties as well. I'd suggest to you, rather than get into the substance of the question about the way the lateral lines have been determined in the past versus the way that we believe they should be updated in applications where that's required, that we would recognize in this case with two letters of no objection and existing structures in which these applicants have vested rights, that we avoid that conflict at this point by simply changing this label to make it clear the board isn't, blessing the past lines as updated in conformance with what you would require on an updated lateral line showing, and simply recognize this application because it is within the development footprint that's already in the developable waterway area, and has two letters of no objection, that we'd ask you simply approve the permit for these lift changes within the developable waterway and the literally developed area without requiring those updated lines at this point. However, I want to conclude this comment by saying we'd have no objection if you wanted to note in your approval that certainly future applications may be required to show updated lines depending on what's in them and the circumstances of the city code at that point.
I guess that's the key thing for me. The lateral lines, don't comply with Title 15, but it's a moot point since adjacent property owners have, no objection, and it makes sense. This is interior to the marina, as I said in the previous meeting. If we get, no objection, I'm uncomfortable with. I think we need to, in our findings, say that we're not accepting these kind of what wording, sort of what you said. We're not accepting these previously approved lateral lines as necessarily accurate, with regard to Title 15. Because I know in previous findings of fact, we've even made that kind of a statement. So I don't know, without looking back at previous findings of fact where these lateral lines were presented, we don't know if there was that kind of a statement. And maybe there's an oversight too. I mean, what's not clear to me is we go forward, if a previous, Fort Wardens group made an inaccurate, assessment of what, well, it should really be at the planning and zoning level reviewing the lateral lines, I guess. If improper lateral lines are approved, are we stuck with them, or at some point, if it's an issue, do we have to go through a revision? But it doesn't matter for this application. So I'd rather the findings of fact not really address the lateral lines, acknowledge that the previously approved ones may be inaccurate, but the no objection letter, makes it a moot point.
We would be accepting of that, Mr. Butler, if that is your decision tonight. And I would suggest the language be something along the lines of the board makes no finding as to the accuracy of these lines and does not bless them as or approve them as accurately updated lines in accordance with that code section, but it's a moot point here.
Right.
I'm disturbed by two things, John. One, we asked for the lateral lines and we got no indication that they wouldn't be provided. And at 5:30 today, we got a letter saying we're not going to provide them. Secondly is, and I'll ask Mr. Dales, I noticed on the drawing that there is an arrow showing true north. Do you think if we approve this application that we're deciding that and approving that item on the drawing is true north, so it can be relied upon in setting your compass? In other words, is everything on this drawing, just because we approve an application, our previous board approves an application, does it mean we approve the lateral lines and what true north is?
Mr. Chairman, I think those are fair questions. Thankfully, in the case of true north, we have the instrument to check it and it remains constant. And in the case of the lateral lines, the answer is a little different. There's some legal detail here. To the extent we need to get into this, I'm happy to discuss it. I will make a couple of comments to the board on this issue. One, these are not non-conforming uses. These are legal structures, and they are not non-conforming uses if you were to update the lines in the sense the code describes non-conforming uses, nor in the way that case law describes non-conforming uses. The key distinction I think you should be very aware of here is that this is not a case of lateral lines having been drawn and then the law changing such that those lateral lines and the structures built in accordance with them have become illegal or non-conforming. The laws remain the same. It's simply an interpretation of the law or a recognition and observation that the law should have been implemented differently that's happening here. So, that's not what a non-conforming use is, either by the city code or in Maryland case law. And I'd also note that if there was an insistence on adding lines for every application, you wouldn't necessarily be creating non-conforming uses by doing that. It might be a much greater problem for folks that they would, probably resist with the types of legal arguments I'm going to describe next. So legally, I think it would be inequitable as a matter of law for the city to approve lateral lines and permits in accordance with those lines over the past couple of decades. And then without the law changing, require new lateral line locations after after the owners have constructed piers with vested rights in those permits. You vest rights when you make substantial investment through physical construction. And secondly, where these owners have demonstrated a good faith reliance in approvals from the city, which have led to a substantial change in their financial position. Those are the legal standards that go into a decision about whether an action like this would be legally inequitable. And so I think as a matter of law, these are legally existing structures in accordance with state law and the principles of vesting of rights and property, like these piers that have been constructed. So with that observation, I guess my point is there's nothing in the code that explicitly requires the updating lateral lines for every permit. Where it's not necessary, as here, I would say we avoid those issues. And if there is concern from the board about what you're saying here, about whether if something's shown on a plan then becomes effectively a law, I would say the note that we've added to the plans is in the interest of avoiding that concern or addressing that concern in the minds of the board. And if the opinion speaks to that, I would hope that that helps to also further address any concern that those lateral lines would be continued to be relied on if you feel that they may be inaccurate or have been approved inaccurate. But I guess the key point in answer to your question is that where there's been reliance and substantial investment in construction in property that folks have vested rights in, those past decisions about where our lateral lines are do have some legal consequence.
Thank you. I just want to make it clear, I don't feel constrained because we've approved a previous application, or any board has, constrained to view that as necessary precedent over our approval of lateral lines. So John, would you like to, you have a motion?
Trying to unmute here. I would move to approve this with wordings in the findings of fact, similar to what Mr. Dell suggested, that the drawing accurately represents possibly previously approved lateral lines without documentation to show that approval. We don't really know that, but it's an assertion anyway. Because I know over on the other side of Eastport, we have a lot of dock structures that have been built out, and it might look like they were previously approved lateral lines, but a lot of those docks were built prior to Title 15 code. So it's like, structures that go out in the water similar to this that don't make sense with regard to Title 15. And in that case, they're not really previously approved lateral line. It's just previous construction under prior situations. But here, maybe there is previously approved lateral line. We don't really know that for sure, but there's an assertion.
We can always,
That's but that's if we don't make any finding with regard to the lateral lines, I'm okay. Sorry for the drawn out motion, but that's what I would move to approve.
I second the motion. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
You're approved with the language that there's no findings as to the authenticity of the lateral lines. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
Great,
Chairman.
thank you.
The next item is our first item of new business, one and only item, the application of 123A Spa View.
Mr. Gottlieb, we need to put the exhibits in the record.
I thought those, I'm sorry. Yes.
I can tell you what they are.
Of no objection and,
Right.
And the letter from Mr. Dales are made part of the record. Thank you. Thank you. So now then, who is speaking for Dan? Or Dan, are you going to be speaking? You swear to tell the wardens to the best of your ability?
Yes, sir.
And Mr. Houghton, are you going to ask to speak?
Yes, I am.
Okay, do you swear to tell the truth to the court wardens to the best of your ability?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. Go ahead, Dan. Why don't you describe the application?
I'm Dan Larian, representing John and Deborah Contour at 123A Spa View Avenue. The public notice signs were posted on 7/15. The mailing was put out on 7/16. The purpose of this application is to improve navigation and to raise the elevation of the piers so that the substructure and the electric is not in water on high tide. So we're going to remove the existing 4-foot by 54-foot pier and a 6 by 20-foot platform, 4 mooring piles and a boat lift. Move the pier over to the center of the property and construct a 6 by 75-foot pier. Install 5 mooring piles, a 10 by 14 kayak launch, and relocate the existing boat lift. The amount of piles that are in the existing pier are 25. The proposed construction of the new pier will be 23, so there'll be 2 less piles. The encroachment channelward of the new pier is 2 feet less than the current mooring piles that exist. Other than that, that's pretty much what we're going to do. Everything fits within the setbacks and within the lateral lines. And that would be it.
Then I have one question on a piling, one of the proposed pilings that is sitting right on the harbor line, the furthest one away from the pier. And my basis of my question is a boat going to be in a slip there so the bow overhangs the harbor line? Otherwise,
Yes, sir. We back the boat lift up 3 feet so that when we put the boat lift on there, that the stern of the boat will be flush with the end of the pier.
I mean, on the other side.
The other side, not intended to be, Gene. No, sir.
Because it looks to me impossible to use that on the harbor line as a mooring piling. Well, I guess if you stern in.
Well, if you break 90 degrees to that pile to the pier, it lands back on the pier about 4 or 5 feet, which is inside the harbor line. But you're right. If it's not tied up properly, it could encroach over the harbor line, but it's not intended to be.
Okay, the owner should know that he cannot put a boat there that overhangs the harbor line.
Yes, sir.
I have no other questions. Scott, John?
I have no questions as of yet. I don't see anything to question so far. John?
I have a question about what you described, Dan, about the existing pilings versus, I'm looking at, I see, okay, so that in the existing structure, that existing mooring pile, that's kind of mid-property. Okay, that's the one that you say is.
It's almost over the harbor line, and we're going to back up just inside of it. So we're not encroaching as far channelward as the existing, I feel anyway. But
So, and there's 2, I guess, is there another one there also paired up with it?
yeah, there's two existing mooring piles that are kind of straddling the harbor line, but we're going to set our piles inside the harbor line by some distance.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
With that, if there are no other questions, we have a letter from Mr. Houghton expressing some concern about navigation. So Mr. Houghton, would you like to comment on this application?
Okay, good evening to everybody. I've lived on the creek for many years, 7 years plus, and just seen docks, fillings, things, bulkheads. They encroach on the creek. Every time you do that, you're causing an issue with the natural tidal flow of the water. And with that, I believe the creek, at least on my end, is silting in at a much accelerated rate. And when I'm given a chance to say something about this, I do. If the dock could be pushed back just a little bit, like 10 feet or so it doesn't extend out into the creek as much. People coming around that corner, 121, may or may not see that dock and they run into it. As you know, down there at Oyster Point, there's a piling, that's a mooring piling that's extends quite a bit out into the creek. And I noticed last year somebody knocked it over. And if you go down to the new South Annapolis Marina, I was surprised to see how much building is going on there and how far those docks come out. And I believe all that impedes the natural flow of the water and also helps to fill in the creek. In my property, the 123 property was dredged and filled back in the late 60s. And then back in the late 40s and early 50s, 129 was dredged, was filled in, leaving a little embayment there. And I had my area dredged back in about 2005 or so. And now you cannot even tell it's been dredged. And, you know, and dredging is expensive. And as I said, anytime I get a chance to pontificate about this, I like to do that.
Thank you very much. I think we're all concerned about the silting in of all the waterways and creeks. And in this particular application, it sounds like you're objecting to not this particular application as it exists, but applications in general. And I guess my comment would be that if the pier is no further waterward than the pilings, someone might be less likely to see a piling than a pier if they're navigating. But at any rate, Dan, do you want to have any comment on Mr. Houghton's comments?
We're going to have electric on the pier for the boat lift. I'll suggest to the owner that we put navigation lights on the end of the pier so it would be noticeable when it's dark. But in my experience, I don't really think that pilings with a pier, when there's two less pilings, would create any siltation problem. The biggest problem up there at 127 Spa View, there's an outfall structure that feeds sediment into the creek to fill the creek in. And that may be what's being experienced up there. But Spa Creek was dredged up in that area about 2 years ago, and this property was not dredged. I believe there was some spur dredging that people wanted to participate to pay for it, but I've dredged on Spa Creek in that area, and the bottom is like duck soup. I mean, when you dig a hole, you come back the next morning and it fills in. It just runs from the surrounding contours. I mean, it's not very dense material. So I understand the frustration with the fact that pay for dredging and next year it fills in, but there's not much we can do about that subsoil conditions, unfortunately.
Thank you. Any further questions of my fellow Port Wardens? If not, the staff report, the application, the staff report will be made part of the record, as will Mr. Houghton's written submission. And with that, do I have a motion on this application?
Jane, I'd like to make a motion to approve.
I second that motion. I see John. All in favor of approval, say aye.
Aye.
I'll raise your hand. You've approved. You are approved. The application is approved.
Thank you very much. Appreciate all your time.
Pardon me. Is there any other business to come before the Port Wardens? Any other comment? If not, we are adjourned. Thank you very much, and
Absolutely. Have a good night, gentlemen.
thanks, Scott. Thanks, John. Carrie.
Thank you. Good night.
Nice to
Good
see you.
night, everyone.
Good night.
Thank you, everyone.